The greatest secrets are never hidden in darkness. They are standing quietly in the brightest room, waiting for the right person to notice. Every camera in the Grand Crescent Hotel ballroom turned toward the Alpha Mafia boss the moment he entered, yet Alexander Hayes barely acknowledged the attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he moved through the annual charity auction with calm confidence, offering polite greetings while influential business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists welcomed him with respectful smiles. His reputation had always arrived before he did. People admired his discipline, his intelligence, and the extraordinary empire he had built, but very few claimed to know the man behind the carefully controlled expression. Tonight should have been no different. It was another carefully scheduled appearance supporting a literacy foundation that funded libraries and schools across the country. Alexander intended to stay exactly 30 minutes before returning to a long list of meetings waiting for him downtown. Then he saw someone he never expected to see again. Standing near a display of children's books was a young Omega holding the hand of a little boy who could not have been older than 3 years old. The child wore a tiny navy sweater and looked around the ballroom with wide, curious eyes while clutching a plush rabbit against his chest. The Omega smiled gently whenever the little boy pointed toward colorful picture books arranged across nearby tables. Alexander stopped walking without realizing it. His security team immediately noticed the sudden pause, but remained silent. Lucas, his trusted assistant, followed Alexander's gaze across the room before quietly asking, "Sir?" Alexander did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the Omega whose familiar profile stirred a memory he had buried months ago. The soft brown hair, the quiet smile, the unmistakable kindness in every small movement. Noah Carter. The name surfaced in Alexander's mind before he could stop it. He had searched for Noah more than once after the night their paths unexpectedly crossed, yet every lead had disappeared as though Noah had chosen to step completely outside Alexander's world. And now, without warning, he stood only a few yards away. Noah had not noticed him. His attention belonged entirely to the little boy beside him. Kneeling to the child's height, Noah carefully adjusted the small scarf around the boy's neck before brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. The child looked up with complete trust and wrapped both hands around Noah's fingers. Alexander felt something tighten quietly inside his chest. There was something strangely familiar about the little boy. It was impossible to explain. Perhaps it was the thoughtful way he observed the room before smiling. Perhaps it was the striking blue eyes that caught the ballroom lights every time he looked up. Alexander found himself staring longer than he intended. At that exact moment, the child turned toward him. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. The little boy tilted his head with innocent curiosity before offering the warmest smile Alexander had received in years. Alexander smiled back without thinking. Across the room, Noah followed the child's gaze. The instant he recognized Alexander, the smile disappeared from his face. His expression froze between disbelief and quiet panic. For one long heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Noah gently lifted the little boy into his arms, whispered something that made the child nod obediently, and calmly walked toward the nearest exit without looking back. Alexander took one step forward before stopping himself. Every instinct urged him to follow immediately, yet something deeper told him that chasing Noah through a crowded ballroom would only make him disappear again. Lucas quietly approached his side. "Should I have security stop them?" Alexander slowly shook his head. His voice remained calm, but his eyes never left the closing doorway. "No. Find out who the child is." Lucas hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Right away, sir." Alexander continued watching the empty doorway long after Noah had vanished, unable to explain why the image of the little boy's bright blue eyes refused to leave his mind. Alexander remained in the ballroom long after the music resumed, yet every conversation sounded distant. Distinguished guests continued bidding on rare books and scholarship packages, while photographers captured elegant smiles, but his attention never truly returned to the event. Lucas quietly stepped beside him exactly 12 minutes later, carrying a tablet instead of the usual folder. "I found his registration," he said in a low voice. Noah Carter attended as a volunteer representing the Literacy Foundation. He signed in only 30 minutes before the event began. Alexander accepted the tablet without speaking. Noah's volunteer profile contained almost nothing beyond a mailing address, a phone number that had already been disconnected, and several community service records connected to neighborhood reading programs. It was an ordinary life on paper, almost intentionally ordinary. There was no mention of a child. There was no family information. There was nothing explaining why Noah had disappeared months earlier without leaving a single trace. "What about the little boy?" Alexander finally asked. Lucas hesitated. "There is no registration for a child under Noah Carter's name. The foundation confirmed that Noah requested permission to bring him because the babysitter canceled at the last minute. They approved the request this afternoon." Alexander looked once more toward the ballroom entrance where Noah had vanished. The answer should have satisfied his curiosity, but instead it created even more questions. The image of the little boy's bright blue eyes lingered in his thoughts with impossible clarity. He had seen thousands of faces throughout his career, yet something about that child felt strangely familiar. It was not logic speaking. It was instinct, quiet but persistent. The charity auction concluded an hour later. Alexander politely thanked the organizers before leaving through a private entrance into the cool evening air. New York's streets shimmered beneath recent rain, and reflections of city lights stretched across the pavement like ribbons of gold. His driver opened the rear door, but Alexander remained standing beside the car. "The foundation," he said calmly. "Increase our annual donation." Lucas blinked in surprise. "Double it." Alexander considered the crowded skyline before answering. "Triple it." Lucas nodded immediately, understanding there would be no discussion. The donation had nothing to do with publicity. Alexander wanted a reason for the foundation to welcome him back whenever necessary. During the drive home, silence filled the luxury sedan. Buildings slipped past the windows while Alexander replayed every detail he could remember about Noah. Their unexpected meeting months ago had lasted only a single evening, yet Noah's quiet sincerity had stayed with him far longer than reason could justify. He had respected Noah's decision to disappear, believing it was kinder than forcing another encounter. Now everything had changed. Noah had looked genuinely frightened after recognizing him. More importantly, there was the child. By the time the car reached Alexander's penthouse overlooking the Hudson River, his decision had already been made. He entered his office, removed his suit jacket, and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows as dawn's first hint of light began touching the distant horizon. Without turning around, he spoke calmly. "Lucas." "Yes, sir." "Do not investigate him like a suspect." Lucas waited. Alexander's reflection remained steady in the glass. "Find him like someone who may need help, and if he chooses to stay hidden, respect that choice until we understand why." Lucas gave a quiet nod before leaving the office. Alone once again, Alexander looked across the waking city, unaware that several miles away Noah was holding the little boy close after whispering one promise to himself that he hoped he would never have to break. The following morning began like every other morning for Noah Carter, except that he checked the street outside his apartment 3 separate times before stepping onto the sidewalk. The small neighborhood in Brooklyn was already awake. A delivery truck stopped outside the family-owned bakery where Noah worked, neighbors greeted one another while walking their dogs, and children hurried toward the nearby elementary school carrying oversized backpacks. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, yet Noah could not shake the feeling that his carefully built life had become fragile overnight. Beside him, the little boy happily held his hand while carrying the same plush rabbit from the charity event. "Are we making cinnamon rolls today?" the child asked with bright excitement. Noah smiled, grateful for the innocent question. "Only if you promise to help sprinkle the sugar." The little boy laughed proudly. "I am the best helper." Noah gently brushed a strand of hair away from the child's forehead before they crossed the street together. Every smile the little boy gave reminded Noah why he had spent years protecting the peaceful life they now shared. He had promised himself long ago that his son would grow up surrounded by warmth instead of fear, kindness instead of power, and bedtime stories instead of whispered rumors about influential people whose lives were constantly watched by the public. Inside the bakery, the comforting smell of fresh bread quickly replaced Noah's lingering anxiety. Customers arrived one after another for coffee and pastries while the little boy sat at a corner table with crayons and a picture book. Noah focused on measuring flour, preparing dough, and greeting familiar faces. For several peaceful hours, The memory of the previous evening slowly faded into the background. Then the front door opened again. Noah looked up automatically, expecting another customer, but instead saw a woman from the Literacy Foundation carrying a small gift bag. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I wanted to thank you for volunteering last night. Everyone loved having you there." Noah accepted the bag with genuine appreciation. Inside was a children's picture book signed by the visiting author from the event. The little boy immediately hugged the book against his chest with excitement. "Can we read it tonight?" he asked. "Of course," Noah answered softly, relieved that the unexpected visitor had come only to deliver a thoughtful gift. After she left, Noah quietly released the breath he had been holding. Across Manhattan, Lucas placed another folder on Alexander's desk. "We found him," he reported. "He works at a neighborhood bakery and volunteers every month with literacy programs." Everyone we interviewed described him the same way: honest, reliable, kind. Alexander slowly closed the financial report he had been reading. "Did anyone mention the child?" Lucas nodded. "Everyone believes the boy is Noah's son." No one seemed surprised. They only said Noah has devoted his entire life to raising him. Alexander remained silent for several moments. The words settled heavily in the quiet office. Noah had a son. That fact alone should have ended his curiosity. Instead, the questions only became stronger. He remembered the child's smile, the familiar blue eyes, and the strange feeling that had refused to leave him since the charity event. Finally, Alexander stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "Arrange a visit to the bakery," he said calmly. Lucas looked surprised. "As a customer?" Alexander allowed himself the faintest smile. "No, as someone buying breakfast." Several miles away, completely unaware of the decision that had just been made, Noah closed the bakery for the afternoon, took the little boy's hand once again, and quietly hoped fate had already given them its only unexpected reunion. The next morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn sunlight, and the neighborhood bakery was already filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread, cinnamon, and brewed coffee before 8 o'clock. Noah Carter moved with practiced confidence behind the counter, greeting familiar customers by name while carefully arranging warm pastries inside the display case. At a small table near the front window, the little boy happily colored pictures of rockets and dinosaurs with a box of crayons that had clearly been well loved. Every few minutes he looked up to wave at Noah, and Noah always smiled back. It was a simple routine, the kind of ordinary happiness Noah had worked tirelessly to build. He hoped it would never change. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly. Noah looked up automatically and nearly dropped the tray he was carrying. Alexander Hayes stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat instead of his usual formal business attire, making him appear less like one of the country's most influential businessmen and more like an ordinary customer. Searching for breakfast, Lucas entered a few steps behind him, remaining respectfully silent. For a brief moment, the entire bakery seemed to become perfectly still. Noah forced himself to breathe normally before setting the tray onto the counter. He reminded himself that customers deserved the same welcome regardless of who they were. "Good morning," Noah said with professional courtesy. "Welcome. What can I get for you today?" Alexander met Noah's eyes with the same calm expression he had worn at the charity event, yet there was unmistakable warmth beneath his composure. "Good morning," he replied. "I heard this bakery has the best cinnamon rolls in Brooklyn." Noah managed a faint smile despite the nervousness building inside him. "You heard correctly." While preparing the order, Noah carefully avoided asking why Alexander had come or whether their meeting was truly a coincidence. Alexander did not push the conversation either. Instead, he quietly observed the cheerful atmosphere around him. Parents chatted over coffee before work, an elderly couple shared a slice of apple pie, and the little boy at the corner table proudly held up another colorful drawing. Alexander found himself smiling almost without realizing it. The child noticed first. With complete innocence, he climbed down from his chair, walked across the bakery, and stopped directly in front of Alexander. Looking up with bright blue eyes, he held out the drawing. "Do you like rockets?" he asked. Alexander accepted the paper carefully, as though it were something precious. "I do," he answered honestly. "Especially this one." The little boy beamed with pride. "It can fly all the way to the moon." Noah hurried over, gently placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "I am sorry if we interrupted your breakfast." Alexander shook his head immediately. Not at all. He looked down at the colorful drawing once more before returning it with genuine appreciation. Thank you for sharing it with me. The little boy smiled again before happily returning to his crayons. Noah quietly released a breath he had not realized he was holding. As Alexander accepted the box of pastries and reached for his wallet, his eyes briefly rested on a framed photograph displayed behind the counter. It showed Noah holding the same little boy on a beach during sunset, both laughing freely as waves rolled toward the shore. There was no date visible, but the closeness between them spoke louder than words. Alexander paid for the order, thanked Noah sincerely, and walked toward the door without asking a single personal question. Yet as he stepped outside into the cool morning air, one quiet thought refused to leave him. The child's smile had felt strangely familiar once again, and for the first time in years, Alexander realized that some answers could never be found in business reports or investigations. They could only be discovered by earning someone's trust. Over the next several days, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal again, but only on the surface. Every morning, Alexander Hayes stopped by the bakery shortly after 8 o'clock. Sometimes he ordered coffee and a cinnamon roll. Other mornings, he purchased enough pastries for his entire office, always thanking Noah with quiet sincerity before leaving. He never stayed long, never asked personal questions, and never mentioned the charity gala. To everyone else, he was simply becoming a regular customer. Noah wished it were that simple. Each unexpected visit made him wonder whether Alexander truly remembered that evening from years ago, or whether he had simply recognized a familiar face without connecting the pieces. Noah hoped it was the second possibility. He had spent too long building a peaceful life to risk losing it now. Meanwhile, the little boy seemed delighted whenever Alexander appeared. On Friday morning, he proudly ran to the display shelf and picked out the largest chocolate chip cookie in the bakery. Holding it with both hands, he walked straight toward Alexander. "You should have this today," he said with complete confidence. "You always look busy." Alexander accepted the cookie with a surprised smile. "That is very thoughtful of you." The little boy nodded seriously. "Mom says cookies help people smile." Noah immediately corrected him with a gentle laugh. "I said they sometimes make people smile." The child giggled and hugged Noah around the waist before returning to his coloring book. Alexander quietly watched the exchange, noticing how naturally Noah balanced patience, warmth, and encouragement in every conversation. It was obvious that the child felt completely safe with him. That simple observation stayed with Alexander long after he returned to his office. Later that afternoon, Lucas entered carrying another folder, but did not place it on the desk immediately. "There is something unusual," he said carefully. Alexander looked up from his computer. "Go on." Everything about Noah's recent life is transparent. Employment records, volunteer work, neighborhood references, and tax filings all match perfectly. The only missing chapter is approximately 4 years ago. There is almost an entire year with no employment history, no lease agreements, and very few public records. Alexander remained silent, encouraging Lucas to continue. It is as though he intentionally stepped away from the world for a while before starting over. Alexander slowly leaned back in his chair. He was not interested in exposing Noah's private past simply because it contained unanswered questions. Yet the missing year aligned almost exactly with the time after they had unexpectedly met. The coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. That evening, as the city lights reflected across the Hudson River, Alexander found himself holding the colorful rocket drawing that the little boy had given him earlier in the week. He had placed it inside a leather portfolio instead of throwing it away, something Lucas had quietly noticed but wisely chose not to mention. At nearly the same moment across Brooklyn, Noah tucked the little boy into bed and began reading the signed picture book from the charity event. Before closing his eyes, the child looked up and asked softly, "Will the nice man from the bakery come back tomorrow?" Noah paused for only a second before smiling gently. "Maybe." The little boy hugged his plush rabbit and whispered, "I think he looks happy when he talks to us." After the bedroom door closed, Noah stood alone in the quiet apartment, staring out at the evening sky. Deep inside, he knew fate was moving pieces he could no longer control, and for the first time since rebuilding his life, he wondered how much longer the truth could remain hidden before it quietly found its own way into the light. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies, and the bakery was busier than usual as families filled the neighborhood sidewalks. Noah Carter welcomed each customer with the same calm smile, but he noticed something different the moment Alexander Hayes stepped through the front door. Instead of standing alone, Alexander carried a neatly wrapped children's science kit decorated with planets and stars. He approached the counter first instead of walking toward the tables. "This is for the young artist," he said quietly. "Only if you think it is appropriate." Noah looked at the carefully wrapped package before meeting Alexander's eyes. There was no expectation behind the gesture, only simple kindness. After a brief hesitation, Noah nodded. "Thank you. That is very thoughtful." Before Noah could call him over, the little boy spotted Alexander on his own and hurried across the bakery with unmistakable excitement. "You came back," he exclaimed. Alexander smiled naturally. "I said I liked your rockets." The child accepted the gift with careful hands and immediately sat at a nearby table to open it. Inside were small pieces that could be assembled into a model of the solar system. His face lit up with pure delight. "Look, Mom, Saturn has rings." Noah laughed softly at the familiar mistake, but chose not to correct him immediately, knowing the child had used that nickname since learning that many of his classmates had mothers instead of fathers at home. Alexander noticed the word but showed no reaction beyond a gentle smile, respecting Noah's privacy without asking questions. Throughout the morning, the bakery remained lively, and Alexander stayed longer than usual. Sipping coffee while reading a newspaper he barely turned the pages of. More than once, he caught himself watching Noah patiently help customers, encourage the child to clean up scattered puzzle pieces, and greet elderly neighbors by name. There was a quiet warmth surrounding Noah that no investigation could have captured. It explained why everyone trusted him. As noon approached, the little boy finally carried his completed model of the planets toward Alexander. "Can you help me hang this in my room someday?" he asked with complete innocence before quickly looking toward Noah. "If Mom says it is okay." Noah's smile faded for the briefest moment, caught completely off guard by the spontaneous invitation. Alexander gently knelt until he was at the child's eye level. "That sounds like a wonderful room," he replied kindly, "but I think your parents should decide who visits your home." The child nodded, accepting the answer without disappointment. Noah silently appreciated the respect in Alexander's response. It revealed more about the man than any newspaper article ever had. After leaving the bakery, Alexander returned to his office unusually thoughtful. Lucas entered a short time later carrying an envelope that had arrived from the Literacy Foundation. "There is one more record you asked us to verify," Lucas explained. "It concerns the volunteer history." Alexander opened the envelope and carefully examined several attendance lists from community reading events held over the past few years. Then his attention stopped on one faded group photograph attached to the oldest report. Dozens of volunteers smiled toward the camera during a neighborhood literacy festival held almost 4 years earlier. Standing near the back was Noah, noticeably younger, with one protective hand resting gently against the side of his coat. The gesture seemed ordinary at first, but something about it stirred a forgotten memory inside Alexander. He stared at the photograph much longer than expected before quietly whispering to himself, "What happened after we said goodbye?" Miles away, Noah placed the finished solar system above the little boy's bed that evening, unaware that a single forgotten photograph had just become the first piece of a truth that neither of them could keep hidden forever. Monday arrived with a gentle rain that painted the streets of Brooklyn in silver reflections, and Noah Carter welcomed the slower pace inside the bakery. The little boy sat near the front window building the model planets again, carefully arranging each colorful sphere exactly as he had learned from the instruction booklet. Every few minutes, he proudly announced another fact about the solar system, causing customers to smile as they waited for fresh coffee. Noah watched him with quiet affection, grateful that childhood curiosity had replaced the uncertainty that had followed the charity event. For the first time in several days, he allowed himself to believe life might return to normal. Across Manhattan, however, Alexander Hayes remained seated in his office long before sunrise, the old literacy festival photograph resting on his desk. He studied every face once again before pressing the intercom. "Lucas, come in." His assistant entered carrying the morning schedule, but Alexander pointed toward the photograph instead. "I want to know everything about this event." Lucas examined the faded image carefully. It It was organized by neighborhood volunteers almost 4 years ago. Attendance records are incomplete because it was a community project rather than a formal fundraiser. Alexander nodded slowly. Find the original organizers. I am not looking for private information. I only want to understand the timeline. Lucas recognized the difference immediately. Alexander was no longer investigating Noah. He was searching for answers that might explain his own forgotten memories. Later that afternoon, Alexander canceled 2 business meetings and quietly visited the Literacy Foundation himself. The director happily welcomed him, assuming he had come to discuss future donations. During their conversation, she mentioned Noah with genuine admiration. He has always been the first volunteer to arrive and the last one to leave, she said warmly. Even during the difficult period when he was expecting a baby, he still found time to read to children every weekend. Alexander's attention sharpened immediately, though his expression remained calm. Expecting a baby, he repeated gently. The director smiled without realizing the significance of her words. Yes, it was years ago now. He never complained, even though everyone could see he was exhausted. He always said the little one gave him a reason to keep moving forward. Alexander thanked her sincerely before leaving, but her simple comment echoed in his thoughts throughout the drive back to the city. The timing aligned almost perfectly with the missing year Lucas had discovered. More pieces were quietly falling into place, yet one important question remained unanswered. Why had Noah chosen to disappear without saying a single word? That evening, rain continued falling outside the bakery as Noah prepared to close for the day. He noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street, but did not see Alexander inside. Instead, Lucas stepped out carrying a large box. He entered with a polite smile and placed it on the counter. Mr. Hayes asked me to donate these new children's books to your neighborhood reading program, he explained. He thought they might be useful. Noah looked inside the box and found dozens of beautifully illustrated books for young readers. There was no business card, no request for recognition, and no expectation of gratitude. Only a handwritten note resting on top that read, "Every child deserves a story that makes them believe tomorrow will be brighter." Noah quietly folded the note into his pocket, his heart growing unexpectedly heavy. For the first time since their paths crossed again, he wondered whether protecting the past might eventually hurt more than revealing the truth. While only a few blocks away, the little boy looked out the rain-covered window and smiled, as though he somehow sensed that a long-awaited answer was drawing closer with every passing day. The following Saturday, the Neighborhood Literacy Foundation hosted its annual Family Reading Festival in the community park, filling the morning with music, colorful tints, and rows of children's books waiting to be discovered. Noah Carter had volunteered to organize the reading corner, carefully arranging storybooks while the little boy eagerly helped place handmade bookmarks inside each one. Laughter drifted through the park as families gathered on picnic blankets, and for a while Noah almost forgot the quiet uncertainty that had followed him for weeks. Then a familiar voice greeted the event coordinator only a few yards away. Alexander Hayes had arrived without cameras, without business partners, and without the formal presence that usually surrounded him. He wore a simple navy jacket and carried several cartons filled with brand new children's books donated anonymously to the foundation. The director welcomed him with sincere gratitude before asking if he would spend a few minutes reading to the children. Alexander accepted with a quiet smile. Noah watched from across the lawn, surprised to see how naturally Alexander knelt beside a semicircle of excited children and began reading with calm patience. His voice was steady, warm, and expressive enough to hold every child's attention. Even the little boy slowly wandered over and sat near the front, listening with complete fascination. When the story ended, the children applauded enthusiastically before rushing toward the craft tables. The little boy lingered behind. Looking up at Alexander with innocent curiosity, he asked, "Will you read another one next time?" Alexander smiled gently. "If your parent says it is all right, I would be happy to." The child nodded proudly before running back toward Noah. A few minutes later, a sudden autumn shower rolled across the park without warning. Volunteers quickly covered the tables, while parents hurried children beneath the large event pavilion. Noah gathered stacks of books before the rain could damage them, but one heavy box slipped from the folding table and scattered dozens of books across the wet grass. Before Noah could react, Alexander was already beside him, kneeling without hesitation to help collect every book one by one. Neither of them spoke at first. Rain tapped softly against the pavilion roof while they worked side by side in quiet cooperation. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "Thank you." Alexander looked at him with the same calm expression he had worn since returning to Noah's life. "You have thanked me too many times recently." Noah lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. After a long pause, Alexander spoke again, his voice gentle enough that only Noah could hear. "I am not trying to change your life." Noah looked up. Slowly, Alexander continued, "I only want to understand why you believe disappearing was the only choice." Noah's hands became still. For several heartbeats, the sounds of children laughing nearby seemed impossibly distant. He had imagined this question many times, yet hearing it spoken aloud made every carefully built wall inside him tremble. Before he could answer, the little boy came running toward them carrying a brightly colored umbrella almost as tall as he was. Without hesitation, he opened it above both Noah and Alexander, smiling proudly as though protecting them from the rain was the most important job in the world. Noah felt emotion tighten in his chest as Alexander looked at the child with unmistakable affection. Neither man noticed the elderly Foundation volunteer watching from across the pavilion until she approached with a thoughtful smile. Looking first at the little boy, then at Alexander, she quietly said, "You know, I remember seeing someone with those same blue eyes years ago, long before this little one was born." Her simple remark settled into the silence between them, and for the first time, the past no longer felt like something that could remain hidden much longer. The elderly volunteer's quiet observation lingered in the air long after the rain had stopped. Noah Carter lowered his eyes, realizing the moment he had spent years trying to avoid had finally arrived. The little boy stood between them holding the colorful umbrella, smiling proudly without understanding the emotions surrounding him. Alexander Hayes gently knelt until he was at the child's height. "Thank you for sharing your umbrella with us," he said warmly. The little boy smiled even brighter. "Everybody should stay dry together." His simple words settled deeply in both men's hearts. A few minutes later, after the festival had begun winding down, Noah asked one of the volunteers to watch the child while he and Alexander took a short walk along the quiet path beside the park. Autumn leaves drifted across the pavement as neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "You asked why I disappeared." Alexander nodded but did not interrupt. Noah took a slow breath before continuing. "After we met, my life changed in ways I never expected. When I learned I was going to become a parent, I spent many nights wondering whether I should tell you. Every answer I imagined felt selfish. Your world was built around responsibility, influence, and expectations. Mine was built around finding enough peace for a child to grow up smiling. I believe the kindest choice was to let you keep living your life while I protected ours." Alexander listened carefully, never looking away. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet understanding mixed with unmistakable regret. "You made every decision alone," he said softly. Noah nodded. "I did not want our child to become part of a public story. I wanted him to have birthday parties, school concerts, bedtime stories, and neighbors who knew him simply as a cheerful little boy." Alexander remained silent for a long moment before speaking again. "I cannot change the years that have already passed." His voice was steady but deeply sincere. "But if I was never given the chance to stand beside you, then I hope you will allow me the chance to stand beside both of you now." Noah felt tears gathering in his eyes, not because of guilt, but because there was no accusation in Alexander's words. Only patience, only hope. Before Noah could answer, the little boy came running down the path carrying the model solar system in both hands. "Look," he called happily. "The volunteer fixed the loose planet for me." He stopped beside them and looked from Noah to Alexander with innocent curiosity. "Are you both friends now?" Noah smiled through the emotion in his eyes. Alexander glanced toward Noah before answering gently, "I hope we are becoming friends." The little boy seemed completely satisfied with that answer. He reached out and instinctively took one of Noah's hands and one of Alexander's, encouraging them to walk together back toward the festival. Neither man pulled away. As they reached the reading tent, the Foundation director invited them to join the children for one final story before everyone went home. Alexander accepted the book, but before he began reading, he looked toward Noah once more. Noah answered with the smallest reassuring nod. Sitting side by side while children gathered around them, Alexander read every page with warmth and quiet joy as the little boy leaned comfortably against Noah's shoulder, smiling through every chapter. When the final page was finished, applause filled the tent, and golden evening sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a gentle glow across the families still lingering in the park. In that peaceful moment, no grand announcement was needed, no dramatic promise was spoken, and no public explanation was required. Sometimes a family begins not with perfect timing, but with the courage to forgive, the patience to understand, and the choice to walk toward tomorrow together, one quiet step at a time.